Welcome back from break, everybody. Hopefully, I feel like we've had a lot of breaks today. That's okay, that's not a bad thing. So my name's Christy. I'm here to talk to you guys about crop rotation and companion planting. So I know we've had a lot of requests for this, so hopefully I can get lots of information out to you in a short time and not overwhelm you more than your brains can already handle. So I love listening to Jen. She's such a wealth of knowledge, but sometimes I walk away and I'm like, I know nothing. So I've actually heard what she shared today already, so I feel like I'm one up on everybody because I'm like, second time hearing it, you just retain it better. So these will be recorded and placed on YouTube. So if it was just a little bit much this morning, you can go back and rewatch it. So today I'm going to share a little bit about how I do my crop rotation, why I do it. I'll share a little bit about my garden planning, and then talk about companion planting. So you guys do have a printout, and I do have at the end a link where you can actually go find most of this information. So if it's a lot, that's okay, you can find it there. So perfect. So crop rotation, hopefully lots of you guys have heard that before, but it's really a strategy for improving the health of your garden by grouping similar plants together and then rotating them into a new spot every year. So the ones that we're looking at are leaf, fruit, root, and legumes. And we're going to kind of go more in depth on what those are. But you're kind of grouping them together. So you're having to do a little bit more garden planning. When you're getting your garden set up, you're not kind of like, oh, I think I'll plant this here and I think I'll plant this there. You kind of have to be a little bit more strategic in how you're doing it, so that next year you can rotate things well. Because I have learned the hard way, if you're a little here and a little there, crop rotation is really a lot of work, and it doesn't need to be. So crop rotation does a couple different things. It reduces your pests and disease, which who doesn't want that? Because in the spring, like if you've had heavy pests one year and like a fungus or a blight or something, those are going to go into your soil. And in the spring, they're going to come back alive and they're going to start coming up. And if you've planted the same type of plant there, they've got a leg up on you. They're going to start attacking that plant already. So if you're rotating your plant, those, that blight or that bug or whatever is going to wake up, and what it wants won't be there. So then you're not going to have to deal with as much pests and diseases. And then hopefully they'll die. The pests will die before they go and find another place to eat. It also reduces your weeds. So some crops allow weeds to grow and seed more easily. So like something like a squash where it's going to shade and cover the ground, weeds aren't going to grow as easily there. So rotating that through your garden is really nice. It helps kind of keep that under control. And then it improves your soil fertility. Jen talked lots about that this morning. So by grouping your plants together that have similar needs, when we saw, the nitrogen and phosphorus, when you have plants grouped together and they're using a lot of your nitrogen, and then next year you're going to put something in that doesn't really need a lot of nitrogen, you're not depleting your soil and you're giving it a chance to recoup. Hopefully you're adding compost and good things as well. So it also allows you to utilize plants that have really deep roots that are going to go down, and they're going to kind of aerate your soil, and they're going to pull water and minerals and everything from lower. And that way, when the next year, if you're planting something with shorter roots, they are going to have access to those minerals. So getting started with crop rotation. On there, I have put them all on your printout for you. So 4 groups: leaf, fruit, root, and legume, which like beans and peas. There's a whole, I think I put in what different things are in there so you have an idea of what those are. So we're going to start with leaf. So leafy vegetables. So these are vegetables that are going to have a really high need for nitrogen. There you go. This is like a really great visual. I don't think I added this one in your printout, but it's a great visual. So they use the nitrogen to form their stems and leaves, which are the part of the vegetables that we're going to eat, right? So they're heavy nitrogen feeders. So again, lettuce, spinach, chard, herbs, most of your brassicas like kale, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, and hopefully that you've planted those where last year's legumes are. So that's like a really broad, leaf is a really broad one. The next one we're going to look at is fruit, and the portion of the plant that we're eating is the result of a flower being pollinated. So if you are growing something, you're like, I don't really know what category it falls under. Like if it flowers and grows something like a tomato or a pepper, even I think melons are under here too because they have their big flowers, and then they produce a fruit. So they have a really high or a higher requirement for phosphorus, and that helps the plant set the blooms and develop the fruit. So again, tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, peppers, melons. So not only do they need a lot of phosphorus, but they actually don't need a lot of nitrogen. So that works really nice to plant after something that's used a lot of nitrogen. And also kind of keep that in mind. I know Jen talked lots about fertilizing, but keep that in mind that there are plants that actually don't want a lot of nitrogen. So if you're choosing a fertilizer and it's high in nitrogen, you could actually burn your plant and burn your fruit. So yeah, it's a really common problem with tomatoes is people are going to over fertilize your tomatoes. So the next one in the cycle is root. So they need even less nitrogen than fruit crops, but they're heavy users of potassium, which is the one, it's going to be a K. I'm not really sure. I should have asked Jen why it's a K. Probably because phosphorus is a P. Pick a new letter. So looking at root, you can kind of imagine what that's going to be, like carrots, onions, garlic, turnips, beets. Since the diseases and pests that are harmful to potatoes are also harmful to tomatoes, because tomatoes are fruit and potatoes are root, you don't want to cycle those two together. So if you've had potatoes here, or no, if you've had tomatoes and you think, well, I'm going to put potatoes because they're a root, that's one you really want to make sure that they're not together. They're both kind of in that nightshade family. So the roots need the potassium, but not a lot of nitrogen, which is why they come next in the rotation when by then most of your nitrogen has been used up. And then the next one in our cycle is the legumes, and they're actually a nitrogen fixer. So they're actually going to pull nitrogen out of the air, and bring that right into the soil. So, and they can store it in their little nodules in their roots, which is essentially you're fixing it. So when your legume plants die, it's actually going to kind of release those into the soil. So just a little tip, if you are growing beans and stuff, I know in the fall, like your instinct is to go and be like, okay, I'm done with this, I'm going to pull it out. Cut the base of it instead. Leave your roots in the ground. So over the winter, they can release all of that nutrients and nitrogen. And those will probably break down. And then in the spring, if they are in your way, then pull them out. But really give them a chance to let go of all those nutrients. So, yeah, and then they're letting the legumes are letting go all that nitrogen for the leafy vegetables when you plant those the following season. So legumes, peas, green beans, soybeans, alfalfa, clover, and fenugreek. So lots of options there too. Okay, so I have how it works, but we kind of just went through that, right? Like everything's going to use up what it wants, but leave what the next crop needs, or heal the ground for the next crop. So you're always preparing for the next one. So there's a couple additional items that you can use in your crop rotation that are kind of out of this, and you can kind of fit them in wherever you want. So if you have a garden bed that you're not using, you can do these ones as well. So they are cover crops, flowers, and fallow. So a cover crop, I love that Bryn touched on the cover crop, is planting something that it's going to grow and then you're going to knock it down or till it in or mow it down. And we're just going to let that ground sit, but it's covered. That is a huge thing in gardening, is the earth wants to be covered. And if you don't cover it, it will cover itself with weeds. So a cover crop is a great way to kind of let your land rest, but still add to it. So it's a soil building technique. It's used by a lot of vegetable farmers, even on a market scale. And it's usually done at the end of the season. A lot of times you'll do it like the winter rye, right? You're going to let it grow kind of in the fall. It's going to kind of lay dormant and then go in the spring again, and then you're going to knock it down. But you can also do it, you can do like any of those during the summer too, if you have a space that you want to kind of give a rest. And yeah, like I said, it's a great way to keep the earth covered. So flowers is like, I know I'm the worst for like, if it doesn't have a purpose, I don't want to grow it. And I'm trying to realize that beauty is purposeful. So flowers are great to add to your garden, not only just because they're pretty, but they're going to attract pollinators. They're going to attract predators, like predator insects like ladybugs and stuff like that are going to come in and eat your aphids. So they're just a really great idea. Yeah, and they can break the pest pathogen cycle. So like if you've really been having a problem with a certain type of pest, you can kind of go, Google's our best friend, honestly, right now. I hate to say that, but you can go Google what pest you have and then see what beneficial insect is out there that would eat that, and then find out which flower that one likes the best. Plant that, you're going to attract it, they're going to kill either the bug itself or the larva, and then you've kind of broken that cycle. So hopefully you've eliminated some of the problem that you're dealing with, because there's always something in the garden. There's always something trying to eat what you're trying to grow. So, and then the third one is fallow, which means just to allow it to be. Give it a season of rest. Just as we need a day of rest, our gardens need a season of rest as well. And again, you don't want to leave it bare, because your bare dirt, you're going to get weeds. It's just going to fill in with something. So if you're going to give it a season of rest, you can harvest the last crop. You can just kind of leave everything down. If you've done like a cover crop, you can knock it down and let it sit, or simply apply like 2 inches of compost and then give it a good water, and then put 2 to 6 inches of mulch, organic mulch. So if you can get like, I'm a firm believer in wood chips. I think that's the way to go. But you can also do it with what you have. If you have leaves or like whatever, just lay it over so that the ground is nice and covered, and it just has that whole season of rest. It gives the soil a chance to heal. And then after that season of rest, anything that hasn't decomposed, you can pull back, test your soil if you want, and then amend it for whatever crop's going in next. So it's really, there could be 7 things in our cycle, but it's really the 4 and then the 3 you can add in. So there is, I think this is the slide I wanted. So year 1, if you start, I like this one because you can kind of start wherever you want. So if you're like, well, I'm planting tomatoes this year, awesome, you're starting in fruit, so then you know where you're going next year. So year 1, I just have it here. If you start with your leafy, nitrogen-hungry crops, like your lettuces and spinach, then the following year, you're going to follow up in that particular spot with fruit, so whether you do like tomatoes or peppers. The following year, you're going to do root, and the next year, you're going to do your legumes. So... yeah, and then like I said, potatoes are a little bit of a different beast because they share some of the same pests as the nightshade family. You kind of don't want, so nightshades like tomatoes, peppers, and then, so if you can avoid cycling those 2 through, one after the other, I definitely advise that. So I'm going to kind of go through my garden plan. And it's a little bit overwhelming, so don't be overwhelmed. It overwhelms me. There are two, if not three, links for the crop rotation that you guys can go in. It really breaks it down really nice, and then it has like some good visuals, so you guys can go through whatever you're growing. You can kind of look up like, what am I doing next? So the next slide, I didn't realize my ears were funny. Okay, so I printed mine off here, which printed off properly. Anyways, so I actually have two gardens. I have a front garden. It's about 1,000 square feet, and then I have a back garden, which is about 6,000 square feet. So I have to kind of do two separate garden plans, but I'm doing the same garden. Like I'm cycling through everything through the two gardens. My front garden was very well maintained for about 35 years. I'm fortunate because I know everything about this garden. We purchased property from my parents. My dad did this garden for 35 years. I know how he amended it. We got our soil tested. He actually had to stop adding compost because there's too much organic matter, so you can go over the top. But I also know that this is where he grew everything. So he loved to do beans, tomatoes, peppers, and beans. No, there's one more. Anyways, doesn't matter. So I know that garden has had nightshades in it for 35 years, nonstop. So this is year 3 of me gardening on this. So I'm adding in sweet peppers this year, but that was the only thing I was adding in. So everything else I've been doing in my back garden to give this garden just kind of like a season of no nightshades. Potatoes, that was the other one. Anyways, so I'm not going to do this turning around because I won't be able to do that. So at the top, we actually have a large patch of rhubarb. We amend that every fall. We just add in our compost, and it's good to go. It's already huge this year. And then we have another raised bed, and that has my red currants, black currants, and blueberry bushes. I kind of have those separate because they have separate needs. My blueberries are going to like it a little bit more acidic, so I just kind of have that off from the rest of my garden. And then last year, then I have black raspberries, which are horrible things. They're like super spiky. So we have given them in here, it's not that much space. I've given them a lot of space because I don't want to be harvesting stuff around them. It's awful. And then last year I moved my strawberry bed into the front garden. And you can see actually beside, I'm leaving my strawberry bed there. I'll give it quite a few years there before I move it. I'll probably give it 3 years before I move it somewhere else. And then last year on this side, you can see I did a lot of my brassicas. So I had kale and cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts. So that was my leafy, and that's going into the back garden this year. And so instead, here's my leafy. I went to fruit here. So I know I've given it a good rest, and I know my peppers aren't quite as big of feeders as something like a tomato. So I was comfortable putting my fruit tomatoes or peppers where my brassicas were before. So, and then I had some root vegetables. I had onions, beets, carrots. I kind of mixed them all up here. This is where I was like, I'm just going to kind of go with it. So I had some celery, garlic. So then this year, I'm actually, the little boxes, I use cattle panels. So they're actually trellised cattle panels with T-posts rammed into the ground. I don't know how to say that nicer. You just like bang it into the ground. So driven, there, that's a way nicer way of saying it. Thank you, JC. Okay, so on there, I'm going to be doing my pickling cucumbers, cucumber, and I have some loofahs that I'm growing. And they actually go on either side, so they'll grow up both sides of the panels and then kind of meet in the middle. And then underneath that, you can see I also have, it says lettuce, spinach, And then my celery from last year did not die. It was like a leafy celery. So I'm actually, it's not showing on here. I'm kind of changing my garden plan as I go. I'm actually just adjusting that down a little bit so that my celery runs under my cattle panel so that it still gets the shade it needs. It'll get enough sun that it needs, but I don't have to tear it out to put the next thing in. And then I have written in there that I'm going to do okra, which I might do that in the back garden because I have room back there. And then my asparagus bed is there. You don't move your asparagus, so that's going to just be there. So this one wasn't too bad to move. Oh, and I have bunching onions, which I'm not moving because it started like a pot, and now I have a 6x6 area. So we're just going with it. I care to a point, and you gotta have to be a little bit flexible. So, all right, so the back garden, if we go to the next slide, it's really hard to see on this, but it's actually, so it's 33 feet across. So that's fairly accurate, but then it's actually 4 slides down. So it's 180 long. So I do have a lot of space to work with. And then I do try and let a plot of it lay fallow each year. And then I either cover that with wood chips or hay or straw, or I just throw like wildflowers or whatever I decide that I want to do with it. So last year, we transplanted some black raspberries because I'm a sucker for getting cut when I garden. So we have black raspberries are staying there. You can see that I kind of mixed a few things up. So I had fruit and then root and then fruit, which didn't make a whole lot of sense. So I'm just kind of giving it, we're doing all the legumes. We're just going to kind of restart that whole plot as one plot. And then we're going down to root. And then at the very bottom, you can see those are cattle panels. They're on the one next, there's actually 3 more. Those are the 3 that are going into my front garden. And these ones I'm not moving because they're a lot of work to move. So on this last year, my tomatoes are also on cattle panels. So they're upright and across cattle panels. I know Jen did show a photo of something similar to what I had. And then I tie my tomatoes up. I grow indeterminate tomatoes, so they will just keep growing up. And then I kind of trim up and heavily prune them. But I had my potatoes and tomatoes right beside each other. Everything did fine. I don't really recommend it, but I'm doing it again this year, so take that as you will. But last year on my cattle panels, I did pretty much all melons, which would be fruit. So then this year I'm doing pole beans. So that legume is going to kind of restart that area. And then loofah. I don't even know what a loofah is. I'm going to go with a melon. Perfect. Yeah, that makes sense because it flowers. Okay. So that's how I did that one. And then the next slide, I'm going to go through these really quick. So same idea. You can see where I had, it looks kind of crazy, but I had stuff in all different places. It made sense when I did it. It made sense when I planted it. Looking at paper, it looks a little crazy. So then you can see this year I'm taking my greens. So I have all my brassicas, and they're all going there. The only thing that's staying is horseradish, because I put that in the ground, and that'll be there forever and ever, amen. And then I have transplanted some raspberries from my front garden to the back garden because I need more sunshine. They are less herdy, thorny, I don't know. Anyways, but I wanted them out because that whole garden is almost full sun all day. And our front garden, which used to be mostly full sun all day, has had some really beautiful trees that my dad planted 20 years ago, are now ginormous and shading them out. So we're just, we have cut down a lot of trees. So I'm trying to cut as few as possible. So instead, we're just kind of moving the garden around. What else did I have here? Yeah, so then last year, I had lots and lots of beans. And then this year, we're doing our fruit there. Kind of out of sequence. But because the beans have kind of fixed the nitrogen and everything, we're kind of just skipping. And then I'm kind of setting myself up for next year to be able to cycle things through well. Last year, I did not set things up very well. So I'm just trying to amend without over-planting things in the same spot. So, and then I think there's one more. And I had corn. And that is all, it was on the last one, but the top, that's all potatoes. And then I'm doing some drying beans, and then the back is gonna kind of lay fallow. I'm gonna do some wildflowers. I might do okra, and I might do some more buckwheat. I'm always kind of planning but winging it at the same time, so I call it being flexible. I don't think that's what it actually is, but that's okay. So that's kind of how I do my garden planning, is I look at what was there last year, what I want to put there this year, and I'm kind of thinking like, what do I want next year? So some of the things were out of order, but I know that next year I wanted it to flow a little bit differently, so I'm planning ahead a little bit. So it doesn't have to be super complicated. Mine looks really complicated. Just because I have a really big space and I've randomly grown things in the past. So it's just kind of making things all pull together. So, okay, so I'll take questions about that afterwards, but I'm going to kind of move on to companion planting just to make sure I get everything covered. Yeah, okay. Just want to make sure I'm covering everything that I said I would on the handout. Okay, so companion planting. So companion planting is planting, when you're planting two or more crops or plants near each other for the benefit of one or both of those. The benefit is usually mutual, but sometimes it's just one way, which is fine. And it can be as simple as growing flowers near crops that you want to pollinate. So, yeah, or growing two vegetables alongside each other to confuse or repel pests. There's so many varying opinions on companion planting, and there's so much information out there. I added quite a few links so that you guys can go and look it up. You can Google it. If you have a plant that you're like, well, you know, what would be a good companion? Google it. There's some places, West Coast Seeds out of BC, they actually have a printed guide to companion planting, which is really cool. It's got like visual, I think you can order it from them. I don't know, they just sent it to me. And then it tells you also what they don't like. So I know when I met with Jen, I'd kind of joked that I was like, I don't really believe in companion planting. But then when I start looking at how I garden, I'm like, well, no, I guess I do that because I know things work better with other things. So a really great example, a lot of you guys have heard about the three sisters in gardening. So corn, beans, squash. So that's a really great visual and a great, really easy one to understand. So you're going to plant your corn, your squash, and your beans. So your corn is going to grow up nice and tall and strong. Your beans are going to kind of wind up and grow up your corn. And then your squash is going to kind of sprawl out and provide ground cover. The other nice thing about squash is a lot of times, I don't know if you've grown squash, a lot of times the leaves and the vines are kind of prickly. And raccoons really don't like that, but they really like corn. So it kind of keeps one off the other. And then the pole beans pull the nitrogen from the air and bring it into the soil, which the corn really likes the nitrogen. So, yeah. There's lots I was going to say about that, but I'm going to just kind of skim over it. You guys get the idea of the three sisters. So benefits of companion planting, there are a lot of reasons to companion plant, whether you do it like on a large scale or just little bits, but the first thing, it minimizes your risk. So it increases the odds of higher yields, and especially if you're planting two crops to kind of benefit each other, even if something fails, something else is going to do well. Crop protection. So it's really nice when you can, like when you look at the corn, the three sisters again, right? The corn's going to grow straight up, and the beans are going to kind of go up that, and The squash is protecting the beans and the corn. The corn is providing a solid trellis for the beans to go up. So they're kind of defending each other. And then you kind of have like natural defense from harsher conditions, physically supporting each other like the corn. And yeah, I did it last year. I had my sunflowers. I planted on either side of my bean trellises, which I don't recommend doing that. They got way too big and shaded everything out. But my cucumbers and pickling cucumbers actually preferred trellising up my sunflowers than they preferred trellising up my trellis. So thought if you're doing lots of sunflowers and stuff like that, plant some beans underneath, or melons, or not like melons, because they're way too big. Anyways, the next thing that they have is trap cropping. So it really is, companion planting is kind of like the ultimate pest management. So some plants are going to help repel unwanted plants, while others you can actually plant. Like if there's a certain melon that you want to grow, you can grow it with a companion plant and then slightly off grow one more. That is all by itself. Don't put anything, don't put a companion plant around it, right? So when the pests come, they have the choice between this one or these ones that they don't like the smell of. Well, they're going to go to this one. You're probably going to lose it. That's kind of the point. But they're going to leave your other plants alone. Yeah, so that's trap cropping. But companion planting really works in three primary ways to help manage your insects. So the same along the side or the lines of trap cropping. So insects have smell. So the plants emit odors that either repel or attract them. So if you're putting, and off the top of my head, I can't think of anything, I should have written it down, basil and tomatoes, that's one, right? So if you plant your basil or even marigolds, you're going to plant that with your tomatoes, and that's going to repel some typical pests for your tomatoes. That's going to repel them away. It might not keep everything away, but the smell of those are really aromatic herbs and flowers, so that's going to really help. Or if you're wanting to attract them, do flowers that they like, flowers that those insects are going to like. And then also, if you're intercropping things, they're also very visual, so they're looking for those bright yellow flowers or like the things that are attracting them. So if you're planting other things in, like if you have one big area of like your brassicas, which I did, and I had cabbage moth like crazy last year because I had all my brassicas together and I didn't do any companion planting. And I didn't cover them, which, by the way, just cover them. The moths just land on them and lay their eggs. Covering them solves your problem. Doesn't matter, that's a rant. So if it's visually distracting, they're going to probably go somewhere where they're feeling a little bit more comfortable to land. So that's kind of how companion plants works with your insects. So positive hosting was the next thing, the next reason. Planting in proximity to plants which produce a surplus of nectars and pollen. You're choosing to bring in helpful. I know when you think of the garden, you think of a lot of insects and stuff as, well, they're just all pests. They're actually not. Most of them you need, some of them you really don't want, but you really want those pollinators, right? You want your ladybugs and your bees and your butterflies. You really don't want cabbage moths, but you take them as they come. And a lot of those beneficial ones that you do want, they actually eat the ones you don't. So the more positive things that you can get in, the lower your pest problem is going to be. So a great example, has anyone ever seen a tomato hornworm? Some of you guys? Okay. They're the big green fat ones, I know. Has anyone seen a tomato hornworm with all these like white sacs hanging off them? Nobody's seen. I should have got a picture. I should have posted one because they're absolutely amazing. So that is a parasitic wasp that has landed on that caterpillar and laid its eggs in it. It sounds disgusting. They come out, and then they have like their larvae, and they will hatch and feed on that caterpillar. I know I'm getting some like, oh my gosh, looks right now, but it'll kill the tomato hornworm, which is great because we don't want that. But then it will also hatch out all these parasitic wasps, and they're going to do that to other creatures in your garden that you don't want, right? The same with ladybugs. If you have an aphid problem, you can spray all you want, or you can just go get some ladybugs or plant stuff that's really going to attract them, and they're going to come and eat them for you. So kind of knowing, it's kind of pest control and companion planting. So yeah, that's the one I really like. So positive hosting. Yeah, it's really the tomato or the ladybugs eating the aphids is great. Oh yeah, isn't that awesome? See those little white thingies? Yummy, yummy. And they'll just eat them up. So on the flip side, if you have like chickens and stuff like that, if you pull that off your plant, your chickens will love you because they will eat that no problem. They glow in the dark. Yeah, no, if you can't find them, you will know. Yeah, you will know if you have a tomato hornworm, by the way. It will eat half your tomato plant in a day. Actually, they'll do it at night, and you'll see it in the morning. But you won't be able to find the caterpillar because it looks like the stalk. So the good way to do it, Jeff said, or Greg, sorry, take a black light and go out at night, and it will actually illuminate. So, and then feed it to your chickens and laugh. Okay, anyways, I got really hung up on the tomato hornworm. So companion planting, also you're looking at weed suppression. So planting sprawling crops like potatoes with tall upright ones, it eliminates a lot of the weeds because you're covering the ground under a plant that would normally be straight up, and then the weeds are just going to fill in. So if you can pick something that you want, that'll really benefit that as well. Okay, it saves space because if you're doing like all nice rows in your garden, it starts to really take up space. But if you're planting something like tomatoes that are going to get high, planting stuff underneath like basil or marigold or something, it's going to fill in that space. You're going to get a second crop or some pretty flowers, and it's all done in that same space. You can do that a lot, like with lettuce and spinach, basil. So a lot of those things you can do early in the season. They're not going to love the hot anyway. So as those ones are starting to die off, then the other plants are getting nice and big and filling that in. But it's still going to keep your space down. But it's also, the last one is soil health. So by planting different crops with different root structures together, they're offering different things into the soil. Pretty much everything we've talked about, that is how the soil works and how it works together. So plants with tap roots or tubers, like carrots, potatoes, will break up your compacted soil. And then deep-rooted crops like melons and tomatoes, they're going to send their roots really down. They're going to pull up nutrients and water to plants that won't have roots that deep and wouldn't have access to that. So it's really going to maximize your soil health. And then, like we said, adding in those legumes, they're going to pull the nitrogen from the air, add that into the soil. So then you kind of reduce your need for fertilizer. And then you can plant like your legumes, your snap peas, beans, all that. You can do it as a cover crop, or you can plant it and harvest it as well. Because I know sowing cowpeas under sweet corn, it kind of keeps the whole ground covered. And the cowpeas you could either just leave or you can harvest. So that is a lot in a short time. So there is so many different companion plants, like I had said. If you know what you're growing and you want to know what grows well with it, go online and just search it. It's going to come up. One of the links I gave you was West Coast Seed. They have a really extensive companion planting list, which is really great. That's the catalog that I have. So you can kind of search what you look for. And just kind of want to end on, like, there is no correct way to garden. You're going to do what works for you, and hopefully some of the knowledge that we've been able to share with you today can help, this season or next season. You can add little bits at a time and just slowly continue to improve what you're doing, so that eventually you'll be a master gardener. So I think that's everything I wanted. I don't know, was there another slide? I think that's, oh yeah, I did, look at that. That's a lot of companions. And sometimes knowing what not to plant by something is just as important as what to plant by something. So I Googled it and just pulled an image to show you. Like, it's a lot. There's a lot of information there. So I don't even for the most part try and remember this. If I want to know, I just go and look it up, because that's just too much brain space for me. So awesome. So if anybody has any questions, make sure you just come up to the mic. I know there was a lot of information on either companion planting or, what was the other one I did? Crop rotation. There we go.
Hello. So you had mentioned that you actually move your strawberries every couple years?
I do.
Okay, because I was under the impression you don't move strawberries, so.
I don't know that you have to. You can keep fertilizing them. I find they, like every 3 to 4 years, they do better. The year you move them will be a really poor year. So some people will move like half of their crop,
okay.
and then half the year after. I needed the space, so I moved everything. But it just makes it so that soil I'm using isn't completely depleted.
Okay. And then your raspberries you only move just because of more of a shading issue, not necessarily the ground itself.
Yeah. Yeah, you can move it. If they're not doing well, it might be time to kind of move things around, but
Okay.
I don't know. I don't think you really have to move. It's like moving a tree. I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, well, that's kind
So-
of because of the way the root structures on some of those,
Yeah.
I feel like you'd lose them. And then you said that your asparagus, you just leave.
Yes.
Like you don't, because it's really a root base.
Yeah. No, I don't touch my asparagus at all.
Okay. And rhubarb, did you say that you do move rhubarb, or do you leave that put, or no? Is that what somebody
I
said?
don't. We did 2 or 3 years ago. But we bought the property 3 years ago.
Right.
So there was places I didn't want them. So I knew I was going to have a year that wasn't going to be super good because I
Okay.
was moving everything. That's the only reason I move my rhubarb. We just heavily compost it in the fall, and then you don't really need to move it.
So if you're moving, you're going to kind of sacrifice potentially that next season, but
Yeah.
outside, most of them could even withstand a move if like you said, the growing conditions aren't right, or if they're just not getting.
Yeah,
good
or
yields
if you move it
anymore.
in the fall, smarter.
Okay.
That has like later. It's got a little bit. It's when it starts going into a bit more dormancy. Move it then. It'll have kind of the winter to settle in and then come
to
up in the
recover,
spring.
so you're not doing it right at the time when it's trying
Yeah,
to.
I
grow.
never think about that in the fall.
Yeah,
I end up doing
okay.
it in the spring, and then I sacrifice my whole season. So
Good to know. Okay, thanks.
a little bit of planning helps. So, anybody else have any questions on any of these guys? I feel like we gave you guys a lot of information in one morning. So,
I just want to say how much I've benefited from having that girl as a daughter. I have a burning bush, and every year it got aphids, the black ones. And and I always take my bottle of soapy water and spray them. And the last time Jennifer looked at them and she said, "Oh, no, what were those things, those helicopters?"
They're parasitic wasps.
Yeah, okay, parasitic wasp. I'd never known that. I realized that I have a whole bunch on my Veronica flower, and it was covered with black aphids, and she saw a few of those, and she said, "No, leave it," and it wasn't long, and they were all gone.
awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, those parasitic wasps are amazing. You can actually order them.
Yeah,
If
they're
you didn't know that,
native.
you can go on Amazon and order.
I was looking for a picture. I don't have it on my laptop, but in the garden this year, I found ladybugs first, and I'm like, crud, ladybugs means aphids. And sure enough, there was aphids in the lettuce out behind us. And then I looked closer, and yeah, those parasitic wasps are native to Ontario. So you'll just see, it'll look like an aphid, but it's a mummified aphid. So they've laid their eggs inside it, and they are just a swollen brown casing of what the aphid used to be. And so they just wash them off and you're good to eat whatever it was on. And yeah.
Awesome. I know that sounds kind of gross, but
Right.
they take care of the pests before, hopefully before they wreck anything that you've had. So awesome.